Johnny Paycheck went from having a #1 hit song that defined a generation to losing absolutely everything he owned. The man who sang "Take This Job and Shove It" would eventually find himself jobless, penniless, and behind bars. In 1985, a single gunshot in an Ohio bar would destroy the career he'd spent decades building. I've spent weeks researching the dramatic rise and fall of one of country music's most misunderstood outlaws, and today I'm revealing the full truth about how Johnny Paycheck lost it all, and the surprising redemption story that followed. Before he became Johnny Paycheck, he was Donald Eugene Lytle, born in 1938 in Greenfield, Ohio. Growing up during the Great Depression, young Donnie left home at 15 with nothing but a guitar and raw talent. After a brief stint in the Navy, which ended in a court-martial for assaulting an officer, he arrived in Nashville in the late 1950s. He took whatever work he could find, playing in honky-tonks, recording demos, and working as a bass player for George Jones. Donald Lytle reinvented himself as Johnny Paycheck, taking the name from a Chicago boxer. Throughout the 1960s, he recorded for small labels with modest success. Songs like A11 showed his potential, but mainstream success remained elusive. The turning point came in 1971 when Paycheck signed with Epic Records. Producer Billy Sherrill saw something special in Paycheck's raw, emotional delivery. Together, they crafted hits, including "She's All I Got," that finally put Paycheck on the map. But it was 1977 that would change everything. When Paycheck recorded "Take This Job and Shove It," the song struck a nerve with working-class Americans feeling the economic pressures of the late 1970s. It spent 2 weeks at #1 on the country charts and even crossed over to the pop charts. Suddenly, Johnny Paycheck wasn't just a country singer, he was a cultural icon. The song became an anthem for disgruntled workers everywhere, inspired a movie, and entered the American lexicon. Paycheck was now playing sold-out shows, appearing on national television, and living the life of a genuine country music star. By 1978, Paycheck had it all: a sprawling estate outside Nashville, luxury cars, and the adoration of millions of fans. For a kid who had grown up poor in Ohio, it must have seemed like a dream come true. But beneath the success lurked the demons that would eventually bring it all crashing down. As his star rose higher, Paycheck was developing a reputation for erratic behavior, missed shows, and increasingly dangerous substance abuse. The outlaw image that sold records was becoming all too real, and it was about to lead him down a path of self-destruction. What most fans didn't realize was that the same man who was selling out arenas was fighting a losing battle with addiction behind closed doors. The substances that fueled his creative fire were simultaneously destroying his career, his relationships, and his finances. And as we're about to see, these demons would soon transform Johnny Paycheck from a country music legend into a cautionary tale that would shock the entire Nashville establishment. While Johnny Paycheck was riding high on the charts, his personal life was spiraling out of control. The outlaw image that made him famous wasn't just marketing. It was a reflection of his increasingly chaotic reality. By the late 1970s, Paycheck was in the throes of serious addiction issues that were affecting every aspect of his life. Alcohol had always been part of Paycheck's world, but as his fame grew, so did his consumption. Former band members would later recall how Paycheck could down a fifth of whiskey before a show and still perform, at least in the early days. But as time went on, the alcohol was supplemented with pills and cocaine, a dangerous combination that began to affect his reliability. Concert promoters started to worry when booking Paycheck. Would he show up? Would he be coherent enough to perform? Stories circulated throughout Nashville about Paycheck arriving hours late to shows, forgetting lyrics, or sometimes not appearing at all. His record label, Epic, was growing increasingly concerned. After the massive success of "Take This Job and Shove It," they were eager for more hits. But Paycheck was becoming difficult to work with in the studio. Sessions would be scheduled, only to be canceled when he failed to appear or arrived too intoxicated to record. The addiction wasn't just affecting his career, it was destroying his personal relationships and finances too. Despite earning millions, money was constantly tight. Paycheck was spending enormous sums on his habits, while simultaneously making poor business decisions. By the early 1980s, the IRS was taking notice, hitting him with a tax bill of over $100,000. money he simply didn't have. By 1908, Johnny Paycheck was still a big name in country music, but his star was undeniably fading. He was still touring, but playing smaller venues. He was still recording, but the hits were fewer and farther between. What happened next would turn his gradual decline into a catastrophic fall. On December 19, 1985, in a small bar in Hillsboro, Ohio, Johnny Paycheck would make a decision that would cost him his freedom, his fortune, and nearly destroy what remained of his once legendary career. And it all started with a simple comment about a turtle soup. December 19, 1985 started as an ordinary night at the North High Lounge in Hillsboro, Ohio. Johnny Paycheck was back in his home state for a concert, and after the show, he stopped by the local bar for a few drinks. What happened next would become the most infamous moment of his career. According to court testimony, Paycheck got into an argument with a local patron named Larry Wise. The dispute allegedly began when Wise told Paycheck about a deer hunting trip and mentioned he'd made turtle soup. Paycheck reportedly responded with a derogatory comment, and the situation quickly escalated. Witnesses gave conflicting accounts of what happened next. Some claimed Wise was the aggressor, others said it was Paycheck. What's undisputed is that the argument became heated, and at some point, Paycheck pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and fired a shot that grazed Wise's head. Miraculously, Wise survived what could have been a fatal injury. Paycheck fled the scene but was arrested the next day. He claimed self-defense, insisting that Wise had threatened him first. But in a small town where Paycheck was seen as an outsider, a Nashville star with a bad reputation, his version of events found little sympathy. The media coverage was immediate and devastating. Headlines across the country proclaimed, "Country star shoots man in bar fight." The shooting reinforced every negative stereotype about Paycheck in the outlaw country movement. Overnight, he went from being a fading star to being branded a dangerous criminal. The legal process dragged on for years. Initially charged with felonious assault with a firearms specification, Paycheck hired expensive attorneys to fight the case. His first trial in 1986 ended in a hung jury, a temporary reprieve. But at his second trial in 1989, he was found guilty and sentenced to 7 to 9 years in prison. The conviction sent shockwaves through the country music community. Even those who had distanced themselves from Paycheck due to his erratic behavior were stunned by the severity of the sentence. Many felt it was excessive for a first-time violent offense where the victim had survived. Throughout the legal proceedings, Paycheck maintained his innocence, claiming he acted in self-defense. He appealed the conviction multiple times, but each appeal was denied. His legal team argued that his celebrity status had worked against him, that he'd been made an example of because of his fame and outlaw image. While the legal battle was unfolding, Paycheck tried to continue his career. He released albums like Modern Times, 1987, and The Soul and the Edge, 1988. But the shadow of the shooting and impending prison sentence hung over everything. Concert attendance dwindled, as fans were unsure if he would even show up, given his legal troubles. The shooting incident didn't just threaten Paycheck's freedom, it was financially devastating. Legal fees for his defense and subsequent appeals ran into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Insurance wouldn't cover these expenses, forcing Paycheck to liquidate assets and borrow money just to stay afloat. By the time he exhausted his final appeal in 1989, Johnny Paycheck was not only facing prison, he was facing financial ruin. The man who once commanded $10,000 per concert was now struggling to pay his bills. And as he prepared to begin his prison sentence, the full extent of his financial collapse was about to become painfully clear. What started as a trivial argument over turtle soup in a small-town bar had escalated into a catastrophe that would strip Johnny Paycheck of his freedom, his dignity, and as we're about to see, every penny to his name. The shooting was the catalyst, but the financial implosion that followed would be equally devastating and would reveal just how precarious his situation had been all along. As Johnny Paycheck began his prison sentence in 1989, his financial situation went from bad to catastrophic. The legal fees from his shooting case had drained what little remained of his savings, but that was just the beginning. In 1990, while serving his prison sentence, Paycheck was forced to file for bankruptcy. The court documents revealed the shocking extent of his financial collapse. The man who had earned millions during his career listed assets of just $14,000 against debts exceeding $1.6 million. His creditors included lawyers, the IRS, banks, credit card companies, and numerous individuals. Perhaps most devastating was the loss of his music catalog. To satisfy creditors, Paycheck was forced to surrender ownership rights to many of his recordings. This meant that even if his songs continued to be played on the radio or used in films, he would no longer receive royalties from them. Take This Job and Shove It, the anthem that made him famous, would now generate income for someone else. The bankruptcy also revealed how Paycheck had been taken advantage of throughout his career. Like many artists of his era, he had signed contracts that heavily favored record labels and publishers. When he was successful, the inequities in these agreements were masked by the sheer volume of money coming in. But as his career declined, these unfavorable deals accelerated his financial downfall. The bankruptcy proceedings were particularly humiliating because they played out while Paycheck was behind bars. His few remaining assets, including stage costumes, guitars, and personal memorabilia, were liquidated at auction, often selling for far less than their sentimental value to the singer. By the time the bankruptcy was finalized, Johnny Paycheck was left with virtually nothing. The house was gone, the cars were gone, the royalties were gone. Even his future earning potential was compromised, as any income he might generate upon release would first go toward paying off non-dischargeable debts, like his tax obligations. As Paycheck served his time at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution, he had plenty of opportunity to reflect on the decisions that had led him to this point. But even as he faced the darkest period of his life, something unexpected was happening outside the prison walls. The country music community, including some of the biggest names in the business, was rallying to his defense, setting the stage for what would become an unlikely shot at redemption. In February 1989, Johnny Paycheck began serving his sentence at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ohio. For a man who had spent his life on the road, playing to thousands of adoring fans, prison was a jarring new reality. The 51-year-old singer traded his rhinestone suits for a prison uniform and his tour bus for a cell. Even in prison, Paycheck found ways to connect through music. He joined the prison band and began writing songs about his experiences. In interviews, he spoke about how music had become his salvation, helping him cope with the harsh realities of incarceration. While Paycheck was adapting to prison life, a movement was growing outside to secure his early release. Leading the charge was fellow country star Merle Haggard, who saw parallels between Paycheck's situation and his own past. Haggard, who had served time in San Quentin before becoming a country music legend, believed Paycheck deserved a second chance. Haggard wasn't alone. Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and George Jones all spoke out on Paycheck's behalf. They organized benefit concerts to raise money for his ongoing legal expenses and gave interviews highlighting Paycheck's contributions to country music. The advocacy went beyond just words. Haggard personally wrote to Ohio Governor Richard Celeste, pleading for clemency. "Johnny has paid dearly for his mistake," Haggard wrote. "His career has been destroyed, his finances ruined, and he has lost nearly 2 years of his life. I believe he has learned his lesson and deserves the chance to rebuild his life." The campaign gained momentum when it became clear that Paycheck was making genuine efforts at rehabilitation. In prison, he participated in alcohol and drug treatment programs, maintained a clean disciplinary record, and expressed genuine remorse for the shooting incident. In January 1991, after serving 22 months of his sentence, Johnny Paycheck received news that changed everything. Governor Celeste, in one of his final acts before leaving office, granted Paycheck clemency, citing his exemplary prison record, commitment to sobriety, and the strong support from the music community. On January 16, 1991, Johnny Paycheck walked out of prison a free man. But freedom brought new challenges. Paycheck was now 52 years old, bankrupt, and carrying the stigma of his conviction. As he left prison that January day, he faced an uncertain future. Could a man who had lost everything find a way back? When Johnny Paycheck emerged from prison in early 1991, the country music landscape had changed dramatically. The outlaw movement that had defined his heyday had given way to the polished hat acts of the early 90s. Artists like Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson were dominating the charts with a more radio-friendly sound, and the raw edge that had made Paycheck famous was no longer in fashion. Despite these challenges, Paycheck was determined to rebuild his career. Sobriety had given him a new clarity and purpose. Within months of his release, he was back on stage, performing at small venues and county fairs. The voice that had once filled arenas was diminished but still recognizable, carrying the weight of his experiences in every note. In 1993, Paycheck received an unexpected boost when country superstar George Jones invited him to join his tour. Jones, who had employed Paycheck as a harmony singer decades earlier, never forgot the unique talent of his old friend. The tour put Paycheck back in front of larger audiences and reminded fans of his significant contributions to country music. That same year, Paycheck was invited to rejoin the Grand Ole Opry, a symbolic homecoming that signaled Nashville's willingness to embrace the reformed outlaw. Standing on that hallowed stage, Paycheck often spoke openly about his past mistakes and his gratitude for a second chance. His honesty about his struggles with addiction resonated with fans who had followed his tumultuous journey. But the comeback was not without setbacks. The financial devastation of his bankruptcy meant that Paycheck was essentially starting over from scratch. Much of his back catalog now belonged to others, meaning he received no royalties when his classic hits were played. And health problems, the result of years of hard living, began to take their toll. By the mid-1990s, Paycheck was diagnosed with emphysema and asthma, conditions that made touring increasingly difficult. His breathing problems affected his singing, and performances became more sporadic. In 1997, he released his final album, Tribute to the Outlaw, a collection of covers that paid homage to the movement he had helped define. As his health declined, Paycheck's financial situation remained precarious. Despite his comeback efforts, he never regained the commercial success of his peak years. Friends and fellow artists organized benefit concerts to help with his medical expenses, a testament to the respect he still commanded within the country music community. In his final years, Paycheck found peace in his sobriety and his faith. He became an advocate for addiction recovery, often speaking to groups about the dangers of substance abuse. The man who had once embodied the outlaw lifestyle now warned others about where that path could lead. Johnny Paycheck passed away on February 19, 2003, at the age of 64 from respiratory failure. His funeral in Nashville drew hundreds of fans and numerous country stars who came to pay their respects to a man whose voice and songs had defined an era. In the years since his death, Paycheck's legacy has been reassessed and celebrated. Music historians now recognize him not just for "Take This Job and Shove It," but for his remarkable vocal talent and his authentic representation of working-class America. His influence can be heard in the work of artists ranging from Jamie Johnson to Sturgill Simpson, modern outlaws who carry forward the tradition Paycheck helped establish. The story of Johnny Paycheck is ultimately one of a spectacular talent, devastating mistakes, and hard-won redemption. He rose from nothing, achieved everything, lost it all, and still found the strength to rebuild. His journey reminds us that even our darkest moments don't have to define us, that second chances are possible, even when all seems lost. Today, when "Take This Job and Shove It" plays on the radio, it's not just an anthem of workplace frustration. It's a reminder of a complex man who lived the highs and lows of the American dream in technicolor intensity. Johnny Paycheck lost everything, but in the process, he found something perhaps more valuable: peace, sobriety, and the knowledge that his music would outlive his troubles.